And a lot of people are probably going to be a bit freaked out. Let's be honest, because I understand this stuff. Mikey understands it. I think a lot of people don't know about this stuff, will be a bit freaked out and thinking they may be fucking bipolar and schizophrenic and stuff. So what can we do to just reassure people this is completely normal and get them to sort of identify these different characters?
Well, to start on the reassuring people, I always say the same thing. It's really interesting. We talk about, it's not called this anymore, but it used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's called dissociative identity disorder now, but it makes more sense to people, multiple personality disorder. And when we say that phrase, when I was growing up, I always thought the disorder was the fact you had multiple personalities. And what I've realized now is that's bullshit. We've all got multiple personalities. It's the most normal thing in the world.
Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to another episode of the Prime Life Project podcast. I'm your host, Daniel James, and today I am joined by Mr. Paul Cope. Now, this is the bizarre thing about this. Paul Cope, as far as I'm aware, is not related to Andy Cope, who is the last guest that we had. It just happens to be a massive coincidence that we've got two Copes on the podcast back to back. But I'm really looking forward to chatting with Paul. So before I get Paul on, quick introduction. So Paul is an author, an entrepreneur, a coach, and former corporate lawyer. We won't hold that against him, so fine. He's transformed his life after finding himself in his mid-30s, depressed, suicidal, despite achieving everything you're told should make you happy. He tore everything down, spending thousands of pounds and thousands of hours and a lot of energy deciding to find out the root cause of why he felt so unfulfilled despite having everything that he'd achieved. He coached people from around the world to change their lives using what he's discovered through his personal experience, working with therapists, coaches, and learning from all corners of the globe. Paul Cope, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this. Because like I said, I normally do quite a lot of research into my guests. With yourself, I was just like, there's going to be so much different directions we can go on here. So I feel like a lot of people can relate to sort of the journey that you've sort of been on. So the fact that you've had this amazing life, quote unquote, like again, you said it before, you've had the money, you've had the car, you've had the amazing wife. Can you talk to me a little bit about that life of yours and what led you to have that? And then what ultimately led you to depression? Because I'm quite intrigued into the story about how someone that can actually have everything that potentially I'm trying to get. I'm looking at your story now, author, entrepreneur, coach. I'm thinking that's the kind of life that I'm aspiring to lead. I don't want to be a lawyer, but obviously I know along my journey that that's not going to bring me happiness. But I'm just really curious about what actually went on with your life to build you up there, and then what happened with the depression.
So we could spend a whole hour talking just about this. So I'll give you the short version, but this all ties back into the wider picture. So my story about being a lawyer, I was one of those annoying kids in school who always knew what they wanted to be. So from when I was 3 years old, if you asked me what I wanted to be, I would say solicitor. And it was funny, I've done some American podcasts and they're like, but they don't even know what that is. I'm like, yeah, it's a lawyer. Basically, lawyer sounds cooler. Anyway, as I got older, I was like, I want to be a lawyer. But that story goes back to sitting in the back of my dad's car when I was 3 years old. And I used to love playing with toy cars when I was a little kid. I had this big bucket full of them. And you might remember this, I don't know how old you are. Probably similar.
32.
Oh, okay. I'm doing you a disservice there. So I've just turned 41. But you might remember this. So when I was a kid, I think you can still get them now. I would have one of those like mats you would put on the floor, and it was just like a town that you would drive cars around. I would spend hours just doing that. So I loved cars. And one day I'm sitting behind my dad in his car, and a black Porsche pulls up next to us at the lights. And I said to my dad, "Whose is that car?" And he said, "It's our solicitors." And I said, "I want to be a solicitor then." And the twist in the story was when I was a kid, I was really shy, really quiet, didn't speak very much, couldn't speak very well. So I couldn't even pronounce the word properly. And from that moment, everyone, so obviously my dad's delighted. I'm from a working class background. My entire family's working class. You know, they'd spent, my grandparents' generation was council house and worked in factories. Then my mum's generation took the next step. So to that family, for the grandchild and the son to say, "I want to be a lawyer," it was like, oh, this is incredible. So as a little boy, as soon as I said that, I was like, yeah, everyone seems really happy with this life choice of mine. And that just got reaffirmed over and over again as I went through life. So I went through school, and if someone asked me what I wanted to be, it would just roll off the tongue. I want to be a lawyer. And it wasn't until I got into university and I was in the middle year of uni and they started sending law firms in to give us talks. And I remember this, I can still picture the guy now. He was like a young, buck, cocky lawyer. And he came and he was giving us all this advice. And he said, look, when you come for an interview, you will be asked why you want to be a lawyer. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I've got that absolutely nailed, like no problem at all. And then he paused. There was like this pause went on forever. And he went, there's one thing you're not allowed to say when we ask you that question, though. I was like, that's interesting. And he said, you can't say you've always wanted to be one. We need to know why. And it was I can still feel it. It was like someone hit me around the head with a bat. Because I was like, well, I have just always wanted to be one. And that was the first time in my life I started unpicking this story, that the only reason I wanted to be a lawyer was because one day I saw a black Porsche and said to my dad, whose is that? And he said, it's a lawyer's. If he'd have said to me in that moment, it doesn't matter whose car it is, son. Like, if you want a black Porsche when you're older, you can do anything you want. Don't worry about that for now. Just be happy. I would never have been a lawyer. So then at this point, at 19, in the middle of my law degree, and my head's spinning, I remember going out for a drink with one of my closest uncles, and he sat me down. And it's incredible, these stories, when I look back. And we're still very close now. Don't hold anything against this. He sat me down and he said, look, son, what's wrong? And I said, well, I don't really want to be a lawyer. It's just a story. And he said to me, yeah, but the thing is, what would you want to be if you could be anything? And I said, a footballer. I'm a big Liverpool fan.
Oh.
And at the time,
I won't hold that against you either.
Yeah, it's always dangerous putting that in. But he said to me, what's your chances of being a footballer? And at the time, I was 19. I just had a cruciate knee ligament operation. I was about 5 stone heavier than I am now, all fat, not muscle. I'm sitting there drinking like my 10th pint after, I've had a pizza that night. Yeah. And I was like, well, chances of being a footballer right now are slim to none. And he said, well, this is the thing. Nobody enjoys their job. So you might as well just do something that makes you wealthy, because that's the best thing you can do in life. And I remember thinking, yeah, that makes sense. Because when I looked at everybody around me in my world, family, friends, TV, I didn't see people who were like loving what they did for a living. So I doubled down, committed to carrying on. And it just did what I did with my life generally back then, which was nailed it, got my degree, went off, qualified for one of the biggest law firms in the world, ended up working for 2 or 3 big law firms, left when I was 29, like basically as junior as I could possibly be to set up my own firm. I was like, this isn't for me. Like, I don't want to make other people rich. I'm gonna go off and start my own company. And went off and did that. And it was only sort of 2 or 3 years after that. So by then I'm 32. That's when it all hit me again. I was like, I hate this. I'm miserable. And that's the summary you gave me before. At that point in my life, from the outside, I had everything. Like, when you go back to before we started recording, you're talking about talking to kids. When you talk about the world we live in and the way we teach people to be happy, the things you need to be successful, I did all. Like, to the outside world, I owned a law firm with a city centre office with glass walls. I had clients that international law firms couldn't believe were my clients. I drove a sports car. I owned 5 investment houses. I had a beautiful wife. I lived in this huge city centre apartment with 25-foot high ceilings and arched windows. I made loads of money. So to the outside, I always say at the point when my mum and dad were going to the church club on a Saturday night and chatting to their mates Barbara and Eddie and and everyone was like, oh, how's your Paul? And they're like, oh, he's fantastic. And my mum and dad's mates' kids would say to me at family parties, we're sick of hearing your name, because all we hear is, why can't you be more like Paul Cope? Why can't you achieve what he achieved? And I remember saying to a couple of people back then, at that point, well, that's what it looks like from the outside. From the inside, I'm depressed. I hate it. I used to go into at the darkest time, I used to go into my office in the city centre of a weekend with a bottle of wine or some Jack Daniels and sit there working and plot how I could kill myself, basically.
So this is very, very similar. This is mad, isn't it, Mikey? So you basically summarized mine and Mikey's journeys together. So my thing for success wasn't all the money and stuff like that. Mine was being on the front cover of magazines, being that model that everyone wanted to look at. So everyone was like, oh God, look, this guy's on the front cover of magazines with 2 hot girls. And Ann Summers, I'm on Brides magazines. And again, running a successful personal training business, getting transformations from the outside world, looking so successful. Oh, Paul, this has already started out to be better than I thought, because I didn't know your story in this much detail. So this is absolutely brilliant, because the biggest problem that people see now is people like yourself, the old you. And as you just said there, I want to be like that. I want to be like Paul. I want to be like Paul. But no one ever has the true story. So I want to unpick some of this, if you don't mind. the interesting thing for me is how impressionable kids are.
Mm.
And let's say your dad had turned around when he said, "Who owns that black Porsche?" And your dad had turned around to you and said, "Just some fucking wanker that probably rips people off for a living." Straight away, that tells you a different story about wealth, money, success. And again, when I went into schools, that's one of the biggest things I said about what does money mean to you and all that sort of stuff. And it's really interesting to hear some kids' responses about how negative they are towards money. Yeah. And then when the follow-on questions they asked was, well, where's that come from? And it comes from their parents. So one of the biggest limiting beliefs I had to have in my life, I had to basically unpick this story, was that I didn't want to be rich and successful because rich people are wankers. They rip people off. No one likes them. And again, that was just a story that just got told to me by basically society. They think that these elite people are just people, just for absolute arseholes, rip people off, blah, blah, blah. So isn't it so interesting that your dad actually just planted that seed into you and then that then sprouted to your entire life being created?
100%. Do you know the film Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yeah.
I talk about it constantly. It was in the first book I wrote, which was about changing careers. I tell that story, and I talk about Inception. When I watched the film Inception, I was obsessed with it because I was like, this is a true story. This is literally what is happening to children all around the world every day. And one of the part of the work I do with people as grown-ups is unpicking all of this stuff. It sounds like you do a similar thing. It's like, where does this come from? We have these beliefs that we think are just fact, when actually it's just an illusion. It was just make-believe.
Well, something that I say to people, the definition of the word belief is something that has no factual proof. Because if it did, it'd be a fact. It's not a fact, it's a belief. So you've got all these beliefs that are limiting. Why not then create other beliefs that are empowering? Because it's still the same thing. It's still something that has no factual proof. So again, if you're there and you're fat, miserable, and happy, why not have the belief that you can be successful? Why not have the belief? Because you have no proof to back up anyway, but you've also got no proof that you always have to be a fat failure. There's no proof to that. It's just this story that's been constantly told. So I just want to, before we go into unpicking stories and stuff, because I think that's where we're kind of going to be going today, just unpicking stories and helping the audience with that. Can we just talk a little bit about your dark days? Because again, man to man, I love it when I get blokes on that are open and talking about this because again, my main audience base is females, but they'll know someone that's struggling. And I think it's a massive movement now for even females to get their partners, their brothers, their cousins, their uncles to start talking and being more open. So did you know that you were depressed? Like, can you talk me through when you understood what was actually going on? Because like me and Mikey spoke about, I didn't know that I was depressed until retrospectively I looked back and was like, fuck, I was really not okay. But you seem to be quite in tune with the fact that you were depressed, you weren't okay. So were you just like a functioning depressant?
It's a really good question. And now I think I was more like you. So it's the way I talk about it now very openly and quite clearly, I think is not, if you'd have spoken to me, I talk about two versions of me. There's the old me and the new me. Like, I completely changed my life 3 years ago. And when I talk about the old me, I often say if the new me was talking to the old me would think I was insane. If I went back to the old me and said to him, "You're depressed," he'd say to me, "No, I'm not. This is just part of life. This is just part of being an entrepreneur. This is the paying your dues side of success. You know, you can't expect to be happy all the time. You've got to just put in the work, and you've got to be miserable sometimes." And this is part of the thing. I know I'll jump around a bit, but it ties into all of the other stuff that we'll probably come on to later. And you know, what led to the new book and the way I coach people now is finding the root causes of everything. Yeah. Because I was miserable in every aspect of my life. It wasn't just my job. It wasn't just my company. It was my home life as well. It was around money. It was health. And in every aspect of it, the story I was telling myself back then was, well, this is just normal. Like, so I would look at a bit like the uncle story of, well, everybody hates their job. Well, when you look around at everybody else's relationship, when you're in a relationship where you're not very happy, and you look at everybody else's relationship and think, who is? You're like, well, that's just normal. That's just part and parcel of being in a relationship. So I don't think back then I'd have said I was depressed. It's only in hindsight when I look back, a bit like you've just said then, when I look back now, I'm like, wow, it's scary, I was so depressed.
It's scary.
It's frightening that I couldn't see it. Like I had a breakdown at one point. I would describe it as a breakdown now. And even then, in the middle of the breakdown, if I went back to him and said, "You're having a breakdown right now," the old me would say, "That's nonsense."
And then I think this is the biggest thing. I try and talk this to people a lot, because a lot of people come to me and they'll say, "I've got a friend that's struggling. I know someone that's struggling." how can I help them? And I basically say to them, when you past a certain point, you're kind of on your own. Because as you said, even if you went back and spoke to yourself, I know full well, if I'd gone back and said to me, listen, this is going on, I'd have been like, fuck you. Who the fuck are you? Because you don't want to hear it, because you think you're absolutely fine. And that's the scary thing about it. You have to come to that realization yourself. And once you have that realization of, I'm not okay, that's when people can come in, grab you by the scruff of the neck, and then pull you out. But unfortunately, you can't force someone to see something that they don't think is there, because they're just going to think you're nuts, and that somehow people are trying to steal your money. I'm super successful, you're trying to steal my money, and then if anything, it probably drive you to that worst place. So with this, I hope people are picking up on what Paul's talking about compared to what Andy was talking about last week when we spoke about the 2%ers and these people that are working at this 2% level of being happy all the time. So these people are constantly happy all the time, and we're just looking at actually some of them aren't always that happy, and we give that perception that they are happy all the time. And something you hit on there is the pain of success, paying your dues. This is something that really pisses me off in the entrepreneur world, where you see people saying, oh, hustling, and they're up at 4 o'clock in the morning, still working, not gone to bed. I'm like, you are literally fucking killing yourself for no reason. So why do you think modern society drills into us as entrepreneurs that we have to chase this money, and that somehow we have to go through so much pain and suffering to succeed?
I don't think it's just an entrepreneur thing. I think it's a society-wide thing, and this goes back to the root causes of everything. So when I wrote a book saying how to solve any problem in life, this is where it all boiled down to, is the answer to this question, really, which is, I talk now about, think of humans being produced like in a car manufacturing plant, going back generations. So generations ago, something went wrong in the manufacturing plant, and they started to manufacture faults into the humans. Now, the problem is with this strange manufacturing plant, it's more like Transformers. Think about it like Transformers. Yeah. So the Transformer gets built on the production line, and then when it's finished being built with the flaws built into it, it then comes back around to the start, and it starts working in the factory, and it starts building the next generation of Transformers. That's what we have with humans. And what happened generations ago, whenever this first started, was that we built into this system a flaw that we don't feel good enough. Low self-esteem, low self-worth, however you want to call it. But it's ultimately the feeling that I am not good enough. And what that leads to is a society. I always say there's two sides. There's the further down the I'm not good enough scale you go, the bigger your ego needs to be. So the character, there's loads in this that I could talk for hours about.
No,
but we create these.
I'm loving this shit, by the way. I'm fucking absolutely, Mikey's just said, yeah, like, I'm loving it. I've never, ever, ever heard that articulated like that. Because everything you've just said, I completely and utterly agree, 100%. And I keep saying this, it's, you look at the generations before us that have sort of bred this in, but how you just articulate that, because I'm a very visual person, that is absolutely fucking brilliant. So please carry the fuck on, because this is awesome. So honestly, I'm just trying to keep up taking notes here. This is awesome.
No worries. Jump in whenever you want. So I'll jump around a bit. Tell me if it needs to be pulled together in a different way. So what we effectively start with is we come out into the world as a pure human. Like when you're a child, that is pure unadulterated human, no different to a dog being born or a cat being born. You are a human. There is nothing about you that you don't think is good enough. But then what starts happening is we start getting all this programming, because the difference between us and most other animals is we are completely helpless when we are born. When I was writing the book, I was looking up different examples, like a giraffe. Well, after a giraffe is born, 30 minutes later, it can walk around. Now think about that, just from a very basic level. If you can walk around, you can find food. So even if your parents abandon you 30 minutes after you're being born as a giraffe, you're like, all right, I can still go and eat. I'll just go and find, okay, my dad giraffe isn't here to teach me what food I should eat or not, but I've got a chance. 30 minutes after being born as a human, you can't even pick your head up. You're done. You've come from, this is one of my favorite things I like to think about, which no one ever thinks about, is when we're born, everyone thinks when you're born, that's it, day one. But it's not. You've been alive for 9 months, nearly a full year, and you've been in this really safe, comfortable environment where you've got this food pipe, and this food pipe gives you all the nutrients you ever want, whenever you want it. And then one day, imagine this now, picture this now in your life. One day, that's the world that you live in. And one day, out of nowhere, a big light opens and someone reaches in sometimes and drags you out of that world by your head. You're kicking and screaming. You're literally screaming because you're like, what is going on? They take your food pipe off you. Now you realize you can't lift your own head up. You look at these big giants that are all of a sudden there, bright lights, traumatic experience. And all of a sudden you know that you're reliant on these people for your very survival. And this is where the problem starts, because straight away then you need their approval, you need their love, you need their acceptance. So whatever they program into you, you take on board. So we go from being this absolutely pure version of a human to very quickly starting to adapt to our surroundings for survival. So we'll adapt based on what goes on around us, what inputs we're getting. And one of the biggest ones we get is about emotions. So think about children. From the very start, we say things to children. Like one of the very first things we'll have all heard when we were born was don't cry. Don't cry. Then we get older and it's don't be afraid. Don't be angry. And we're taught that there's this whole part of us, these emotions that aren't acceptable. And this goes back to the human production line then. This is jumping around very quick summary.
No.
The human production line is because the people that built us were built in the same way. They were taught the same thing. Don't cry, don't be afraid, don't be angry. What that actually does is program into us that a whole part of us that is perfectly natural and normal and healthy is not acceptable. So from a very young age, we start to adapt behaviors, we start to create other personas to survive in a world that we're not built for. Because actually, as a pure human, we feel all of these different range of emotions. We experience everything. Think about, I love giving the same example. Think about a child who cries. Think about a baby crying. Like the way they cry. They scream and snot runs down their face and tears roll down their cheeks. Think about a toddler having a tantrum in a supermarket. They lie on the floor, they kick their legs, they go bright red. And then at the other end of the scale, think of a kid laughing. Like when a child laughs, it is infectious. Everybody loves it because it's so full of joy. It's unadulterated. Now think of grown-ups. Imagine if you saw a grown-up, like you see Bobby and Margaret down at the supermarket, and Margaret says to Bobby, you can't have your beers today, Bobby. And he just lies on the floor and starts kicking his legs and screaming. You'd be like, Bobby needs to go to the hospital.
Yeah, Bobby's not okay.
Same with crying. When do you ever see a grown-up cry like that? How often do you laugh like a child laughs? And it's because from when we were very little, we're slowly, when you talk about programming from society as well, this comes from our caregivers and then from society. We're slowly told to dampen down and turn down a part of us. And that part of us, generally speaking, is what people refer to as negative emotions. And a big part of what I do in the work I've done is there's no such thing as negative emotions. Emotions are just neutral. They're not good or bad. We're taught that some of them are bad. And for the purposes of not banging on about this for too long, the problem then, to tie back into what we were talking about before, is because we're taught that basically half of what we feel is not acceptable, deep down inside in our subconscious, we feel like we're not good enough. We're fundamentally not good enough as a human. That ties all the way back in then to the question before about, okay, so why are we taught we have to do all this stuff? Well, we're taught basically that to be good enough as a human, we need to do all of these things externally. And that ties into a whole world we've built then, whole societies in which the people who went before us have got all these problems as well. They've got low self-esteem. They don't feel like they're good enough. They've been trying to convince themselves that the way to be happy is to have more money. And to have more money, you need to work really hard and you need to be miserable sometimes. And all of these things are just the way it is. That's when I think back to that conversation with my uncle, it actually fills me with a lot of sadness because that's what he believes about life.
But this is the thing. We spoke about this a little bit with Andy as well. Most people walk around and not happy. They're not. And again, they've got these beliefs about the world and how things should be. But they're then the people then we go get advice off for things, just anything. And the worrying thing about this is that most people that are successful aren't accessible. So what you're getting people that aren't successful giving you their opinions on money, giving their opinions on being a football player. So for example, if your uncle had happened to be an ex-football player, and then you said, what's your chances? And went, well, do you know what? You've had a really bad knee injury, but I know so-and-so that's actually had the same thing, is now playing the Premiership. You'd have been like, oh, right, so it is possible. I think the problem is that, again, the people that teachers, prime example, teachers, even university lecturers. So people go to university to learn about business from people most of the time that haven't actually built a successful business. Because if they did, they wouldn't be teachers. They wouldn't be university lecturers. They'd be multimillionaires somewhere. So it's really interesting that actually who we learn from, even as adults, is almost warped. And I've drawn this out here because I think it's absolutely brilliant. I'm going to basically knock something together and get Mikey to sort of put it on the screen. About, you're saying there's a spectrum of the more you don't feel good enough, the bigger your ego gets. And that is fucking brilliant. So I've just drawn that out there as a visual thing. I think that's absolutely brilliant, because I think the biggest problem that most people have now is that they're so emotionally retarded and numb, yet they're wearing this massive ego mask to impress everyone else. They are just literal lost souls. And then we wonder why, as a society, we're miserable, suffering with depression, anxiety, all this sort of stuff. But it's so simple to fix it. Why do you think society's built this way? Because we're not the only people that know this. It's a known thing. So why is this not common knowledge?
So I'll add something to something you've just said, which partly explains it. And there's a reason why it's getting worse as the generations go on as well, I think. So you just said, people don't have access to I suppose the people like we're talking about us, the people who have become emotionally more aware of this stuff. And that is true to a certain degree, but I think what is more true is 100% with you on the most people turn to have never done it themselves, friends, family, teachers. The other problem is that the highest profile people they will see are the lowest self-esteem, biggest ego thing. So the people we hold up as a society as the people we should replicate are the most dysfunctional. Because the world we've built, and this is the weird thing, as the more I've gone through the past few years and thought about the book and coached people around the world we've built, the best way to get to the top of that world, ironically, is to have cripplingly low self-esteem and a talent. Because if you have those two things, you will never ever feel like you're good enough, but you're good at stuff. So you'll never stop trying. So if you can pick, you could throw out names off the top of your head: sports stars, music stars, movie stars, business people who are the most successful, in inverted commas, in the way most people define that in the Western world. So they're rich, basically. They've got a lot of money. They own big businesses. And when you look at their behind the scenes stories, they're traumatized. They've got troublesome childhoods. The person who always comes in my head, and I often don't like talking about other people publicly because I don't know them. But some people their personas are so public, it's almost impossible not to. Tiger Woods always pops into my head because Tiger Woods is often still to this day held up as this is how you become. If you want to be a great sports person, do this. I'm like, really? Even after everything we know about his private life, we still hold him up as an example. And don't get me wrong, if someone comes to me and says, I just want to be the best footballer in the world, I'm like, well, if that's your only goal, having cripplingly low self-esteem can help you, because you'll never, ever give up. You'll never, ever think it's good enough. So you'll win all kinds. And I'm a huge football fan. I'm a big sports fan. Something I really struggle with now is listening to people who achieve things in the public eye. And when they're asked about that achievement, they say things like, I'll enjoy it when I retire. I haven't got time to enjoy it now. It's about the next thing. It's always about the next thing. And it breaks my heart because I think that's what I always used to be like. It's never enough. Nothing's ever enough.
I think this is the interesting thing about the England team now. I don't know if you're following the England team. A lot of the England players are the exact opposite now. Do you know when they actually talk about how they're performing? They talk about what they've just done and then they're moving on. So they're not looking too far ahead. They're only focusing on the next thing. So they're a little bit more aware of what's going on and they're understanding the stages, what it takes to be successful. Like, again, in a business, like entrepreneur, like you didn't own this business overnight. Like you took small steps and you weren't thinking, right, as soon as I start out, I'm have a multi-million-pound company. You weren't thinking that. You were just thinking, right, I'm going to be the best that I can and progress up. And I think that's, if you look at some of the England players now, even Gareth Southgate, that's what they're doing. They weren't starting out here to, obviously they would want to get as far as they could to potentially win the Euros. But what they're doing is, right, the next game is this. How do we approach this game? And then we win that game. Amazing. Really good performance. You then analyze it, which is what you have to do. Whenever you do something, good or bad, analyze it. You then grow from it, move on to the next game. Wasn't so good there. Right, let's analyze it. And you move, you shift, you grow, develop. And actually, as you're doing that, you then start to progress. And then before you know it, you're in the finals. I think that's one of the biggest things I say to people now is you have to reflect on the journey. I was literally talking to my coaches about this in my team meeting this week, about how I've got a client doing a photo shoot tomorrow. And even after I've done this, she's photo shoot shredded. She looks insane. I will be reflecting on what could I have done better? What worked well? What could I have done better? But I'll be like, this is fucking awesome. This whole thing. And like I've said to her, the whole way through this journey is you have to enjoy the process. You have to enjoy the journey. And I think what you find now is the most successful people that are doing it properly are the ones that actually enjoy the process. They're not doing it for the end goal. They're like, I am loving the fact I've got to work a little bit late tonight because it means that actually I'm successful in doing things awesome, but I'm not sacrificing my kids' football game. I'm doing that tomorrow. That's why I'm working late tonight. So actually I can enjoy my kids' football game. So they've got this method behind the madness. It's a little bit more strategical. And I think people just don't have the tools to just appreciate. I talk about all the time, gratitude. I think there's a massive lack of gratitude of what we actually have at our fingertips. And then society bombarding us saying it's not good enough. We need more. You should be doing better. And I think social media is the fucking devil.
Well, funny enough, when going back to the last question about, because I'm with you 100%, by the way.
I told you got on tangents. I told you got on tangents, by the way. I went on massive tangents.
I love them. The reason the world is in the place it's in now, I think, is because a few generations ago, some clever people started to understand that you can tap into this low self-worth in society. You can tap into this feeling of I'm not good enough. And you can make billions of it, like not millions, billions. And what happened a few generations ago, this is an interesting story, came up the other day, just again, a tangent. My mum was 75 now. For her 70th birthday 5 years ago, I made her a photo album, like a slideshow. And I went right back to when she was a kid. So 70 years ago, right up to now. So photos from when she was a baby all the way through to now with her grandkids. So lovely present. She loved it. But for me, it was a dead interesting little experiment. And I didn't realize it was going to happen at the time. What I slowly watched happening during that time, just from a physical perspective, was everybody in the photos got gradually heavier and less healthy. Like even, like a photo on a beach of the family. Yeah. When my mum was a kid, everybody in the background was fairly healthy. And when I go back and I think about like people who are into fitness and training now, whenever you really get into it, you go, we're just talking about eating the diet that they ate 70 years ago. Loads of fresh food, I was laughing about this the other day. We call it organic food now. I'm not sure why we call it. Why does that food need the extra word on it? That's the normal food. That's the food without all of the pesticides and the chemicals and the crap in it. That should just be called food. And then the other food we should call crap. Yeah. Like we should call it pesticide food, because that would be a better reflection of what's going on. So if you go all the way back to that generation, they just about had TV, they had radio, they didn't have loads of processed food. And then from there, people start to go, hang on, do you know if we start bombarding these people with messages that taps into the fact that they don't feel good enough, and we tell them they need to buy more things. So even material possessions back then wasn't as big a deal as it is now. We can control them in a way that they'll have no idea, and they'll buy more things, because what we've slowly programmed them to think is to have more money and to buy more material possessions is success, and that will make you happy. And that has just gone into the stratosphere now, because what happened when social media came along was one of my businesses in the past was an online gambling business. So even before all of this, in the past 12 months of shows coming out about what social media platforms do to you, I knew this years ago because I was studying how to build an online gambling platform. And it came during my sort of breakdown and life transformation. I got to a point where I thought, I was reading a book at one point called Hooked.
Yes.
And it was about how you build, seen it, yeah?
Yeah.
It's about how you build loops into businesses that get people addicted. And I remember getting to a point thinking, I don't want to do this. I don't want to build a business that people are addicted to. And it was just, it's a very good book. It's very solid psychology, emotional manipulation, and it's every social media platform you'll use, or all the big ones.
But this is the thing, but people don't want to believe that this is the truth. Please, people listening to this need to understand. Mark Zuckerberg does not give a flying fucking shit about you, your mental health, or your fucking well-being. Let me just fucking tell you that for an absolute fucking fact. Like, please, for the love of fucking God, just listen to what we're talking about here, because this is fucking gold. And this is what Andy Cope spoke about again in his book, saying on social media, we are the product. We are not the consumers. We are the product. We don't pay for social media. Therefore, we cannot be the customers. We are the product because companies pay for our attention. You are a product. If that does not piss you off, I don't know what will. And this is why I love having guests on like you, because I will talk about this stuff all day long. People will think I'm a nut job. Do you want to get people that I've never spoken to before, that have had everything that quote unquote successful people want, and you're saying the exact same stuff? You were literally saying you had an online gambling business, and the whole premise of that was to get people hooked. But people are, oh, no, they'd never do that. Yes, they fucking would, because they want your money. It's actually lucky that you were brought up as a very ethical person, and you're like, that doesn't quite sit with me. And this is what I always say to people, like, I've got goals and aspirations to earn a good amount of money. But at no point do I ever want anyone to turn around to me and said, yeah, but he's a dickhead. Yeah, but he stole that money. Yeah, he did that. Because along the journey, I'll be giving back. I'll be helping people. That's how I want to do it, the ethical, proper way, giving back and raising people around me up as I grow. And that's how it should be. But there's not enough people like that. A lot of people are so self-centered, they can't see the crippling effect they're having on the world around them. And it's so, so sad. And some of these people have kids. And I think to myself, how can you be creating this world that your kids have now got to live in when their kids will probably end up with the same psychological disadvantage that most of the kids nowadays have? It doesn't make any sense to me. They're so short-sighted.
Well, and it all ties into the same thing, which for me is the low self-worth thing. So I know what you mean about what I have a similar thing when I look at the wider population. But I've reached a point, especially with everything that's been going on in the past 18 months, without going off on too much of a tangent. And when I take a step back and zoom out of everything, I get my clients to do that all the time. Let's zoom right out. Sometimes we need to go in and get right into the detail, and sometimes we need to zoom right out and look at what's going on. And the way the world is set up now, like the psychological bombardment that people get, literally delivered to a device they hold in their hand. Like, it's everywhere now. There's a TV in the corner of the room. When you haven't got the TV in the corner of the room, you're carrying around a device that is feeding things to you all the time, which, as we've just touched on, is literally set up like a gambling device. Like, it's literally built to keep you addicted to it.
Yep.
And when you see this, and then you know how the messaging works that comes through these devices, I actually feel sorry for everyone, because if you don't know about this stuff and you haven't taken steps to free yourself from what it does, you've got no chance, because it is literally billions and billions of dollars, probably trillions of dollars at this point, built and pumped into keeping you in that state. And even one of the things I said, when you said before about Joe Zuckerberg, I love that. And something else I say to people all the time is, ask yourself what each business is. So the news, for example, I love talking about the news with people. I say to people, what is the news? And people will generally say to me, they give you news. That's all. That's what they're for. And I go, no, they're businesses. They sell advertising revenue. That's they sell advertising to make revenue. The whole premise of the vast majority of news organizations is to keep your attention so they can sell more advertising. That's what their business is. It just happens that they call it a news thing. It's actually very little of it. I often say this. If it was just about giving us news, so like news being this happened today, objectively, most newspapers would be about 3 pages long.
Agreed.
It would just be a few lines, like this happened today, then this happened, then this happened. the news channels would be turned off. So it'd be like, right, half an hour a day, nothing's happened today, really, that you need to know about. We'll
but what they used to do is they used to put in positive things. Now it's not even positive, it's just fear, worry. And the thing, they just contradict each other all the fucking time. There's no continuity with it all.
But this is the beauty. Once you understand about all this stuff is, well, what keeps humans' attention more than anything else? Fear, anger,
emotions,
shock. Like and this goes back to our primitive brains. Like we're all ultimately still cavemen carrying around supercomputers. Our brains aren't built to deal with this stuff. So they know that
fear of missing out. Why do people not turn the phone off or delete Instagram or Facebook? What if I miss something? What the fuck are you going to miss? Dave climbing on a fucking bus, driving around fucking London after England win. Do you know what I mean? You're not going to miss anything. You're not stupid cat videos. Realistically, what are you going to miss? Nothing. And I say to clients, you have to unplug, try and unplug for just 7 days. Most of them can't even go 2 days. And it's quite frightening just understanding. Like if I did not have a business of any description, I would have a Nokia 3310. And that's a fucking fact. And if anything ever happens, touch wood it doesn't, and I lose my business, I'll just go back to Nokia 3310, mate, and go off the grid because it's so, as you said, and I don't want to go too down this rabbit hole because the more you go down this rabbit hole, the more you understand what the fuck is going on. And the more you just want to scream it from the rooftops of what, like, fucking just listen to what I'm trying to say. Because we can see that people are just driving off the edge of this cliff, but they make it so convenient and happy that people just blister. It's like WALL-E, that movie WALL-E, where people are just in a spaceship and just don't understand what's gone on to society. I think it's absolutely nuts. Like, I just want to quickly loop back to try and tie everything we're talking about into the one thing, which is about your new book, How to Solve Any Problem in Life, the Root Cause of Everything. So I know we've kind of gone off on tangents with this. We've kind of hit little bits of nails. So if you could summarize this, because I really want to summarize this and then break it apart. How do we solve any problem and get to the root cause of everything? Can you give me a bit of a summary and explanation about that?
So it's quite a long book, so you can imagine.
I can vouch for it. It's a very long book.
The process takes time, so it's difficult to sort of sum up in like a few sentences. But ultimately, what it's all about is when I go back to what we were saying before about where all the different problems in my life. This is where this came back to. Even as a lawyer, I was always saying to my clients, let's stop treating the symptoms of everything. You keep coming back to me with these problems. Let's just sort out the thing that's causing the problems. So in all these different aspects of my life, I was trying to figure out what was going wrong. So in my business, with money, with my ex-wife, with my health stuff, and I was working with coaches and different things and therapists at one point, one's at the end of this. And all of the stuff came down to the same thing for me as I was going through stuff. And I feel quite blessed now, quite lucky to be in this position because I had all of those problems. I could trace them all down and come up with this theory. And then once I had this theory, I realized other people already thought it and could delve into it more. And it just all came back to the same thing, which is childhood and the way we feel about ourselves deep inside. And so ultimately, the way to solve any problem in life is to go back to what the real problem is. Something I always talk about is I loved magic when I was growing up. As a little boy, I was one of those kids who had the Paul Daniels magic set and did tricks for my grandparents and all that. Loved it. And then when I was about 17, 18, David Blaine hit the big time with his street magic. And I remember me and a mate were like, we love this, let's look into it. So I started learning how to do some of David Blaine's tricks. And I remember I used to go out and it made me laugh because it was the first time I started seeing the difference between different cultures. And this is very stereotypical and general, and I know this doesn't apply to everybody, but I would watch David Blaine, he'd show Joe tricks on the streets to Americans, they'd be like, oh my God, and like their heads would explode, and then I'd show the same trick to a British person, and they'd go, yeah, it's good that. I'm like, all right. And what I figured out was, to get that same reaction, I needed to do it to drunk British people. So I started showing tricks to people after nights out in the city centre of Liverpool. And one of my best mates from uni back then would hate it. So he would do that thing where he would stare at my hands, like trying desperately to figure out how I did the trick. And without wanting to ruin magic for a lot of people, I always use the same analogy when I'm talking to people about the problems in their life. What most people in the personal development and self-help worlds do in life is teach you to stare at the magician's hands. They're getting you to look at the thing that they think the problem is and try and treat that. That's just the symptom. What we actually want to do is what with most magic tricks, the reason you can't ever figure out how it was done is the magic trick was done ages ago. What you're watching is a presentation. The best magicians on the planet aren't necessarily the best magicians. They're the best show people. They're the people who can present the trick in the best way. Very dramatic. It's a really big sort of end. It's the ta-da part of the magic trick. If you only focus on that, you will never, ever figure stuff out. And it's the same in life. So when we have things going on as a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old human, we'll obsess. This usually resonates with a lot of people. I watch my parents now, 75 years old, just been married, 50th wedding anniversary a few weeks ago. They've had the same arguments on repeat my entire life. The exact same. Me and my sister laugh about it. It's like almost word for word, every Sunday, it's a pattern. There's loads we can get into that separately, but what they never do to solve it is to look at what's actually the cause of it. And I used to have it in my old life. I'll give you a quick story. I used to hate, I was tidier than my ex. So she would just leave mess everywhere. And in every house we ever lived in, there would always be like a dining table that was prominent in the house. And wherever that was, she would fill it with shit. So mess, bags, unopened post, open post, whatever. And I would say to her, can you please just keep this table tidy? Like, it really winds me up that it's untidy when I come in. I'll come in from 12 hours in the office and the first thing I see is this table. And she would say, yes, okay. And then the next day it would be untidy again. And we'd have this argument on loop about the table being untidy. When I did this work, and that's when I came up with the magic trick analogy, I realized I was just looking at the end of the magic trick. It was nonsense. This is what was the difference between the work I do and the work lots of people do is lots of people talk about what's going on in our conscious mind. And our conscious mind is responsible for so little of what we're doing in our lives. Most of our life is driven by our subconscious without us knowing it. So at a deep subconscious level, and lots of people, when I tell them this for the first time, I'm like, that sounds mad. This is what's going on. When I say to my wife, will you please keep this table tidy? What I'm saying on a deep subconscious level is, do you love me? And when she says yes, I hear, I do love you. And then the next day when I come back and it's not tidy, I think at a deep subconscious level, she doesn't love me. And then at a deeper subconscious level, which goes back to childhood, it's because I feel deep inside that I'm not worthy of love, which ties into something you said earlier about money. This is one of the reasons most people can never make money. It's one of the reasons most people who win money in lotteries lose it straight away. Like you go and see studies of people who've won lots of money on lotteries. They either end up depressed, suicidal, or skint again. Well, it's because at a very deep subconscious level, they don't feel good enough. They don't feel like they're worthy of that money. We don't feel like we're worthy of love. We don't think we're worthy of success. We don't think we're worthy of money. So all of this goes back to childhood. It's really interesting. People come to me from all over the world, different genders, different nationalities, different races, with all different types of problems, drug addictions, falling out with family members, trouble in businesses, trouble with money. And we never talk. We talk, may talk 1% of the time about the actual problem. The rest of the time we go back to childhood. We talk about where our belief systems came from, how we feel about ourselves deep inside. We talk about emotions. A big part of the work I do is about accepting all of our emotions for what they are. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. These are just perfectly natural human emotions. And actually, if we weren't all taught to repress them all the time, biologically, chemically, an emotion, I often say this to people, like most people don't even stop and think about what an emotion is. What is an emotion? It's just a chemical reaction inside your body. And there are scientists who say that the chemical reaction takes 90 seconds to end. So think about that. We can be depressed for decades. Think of what we're doing to that first initial, perfectly natural emotion to make it last for decades. So if we go right the way back, and I'm conscious I'm jumping around a lot, but we go right the way back, we start to unpick all of this stuff. We start to learn. I always say what's happened is over time, go back to the human production line. The human that we are is a human that has been built by other humans. It's not really who we are. So the work I do strips that right back. It deconstructs that human to go back to the human you were when you were born, and then to build the second version of you in the way you want to be, accepting every aspect of your personality. Every part of you is genuine, every part of you is valid, every part of you is good enough. And then that builds the platform to change everything else. But it does it at a deep subconscious level.
I am going to be listening back to that quite a few times. Fucking hell, that was really fucking good. I think a lot. I just want to try and summarize what you said there, for some of my audience there, because again, you jumped around, but it was perfect and it was articulated absolutely brilliantly. I mean, really good. Like you, there's only been one other time on the podcast I've been genuinely lost for words, and that was when I was with Terry Tucker. I'm a bit lost now because you've given me so much to think about, and my brain's going. And this is sometimes the annoying thing with doing a podcast, because it's like I want to just pause, take some notes, and press play again, but I can't. I've got to do it live. So basically, what we're talking about here is identity, like on the most fundamental level of who we are. So I'm going to get the ball rolling for you to think now, because I want to go into identity in a second, because we've kind of hit the surface of it. I want to go deep into that, about becoming that 2.0 version of us, because you mentioned it earlier on about who you are now and who you were, two different people. I'm exactly the same. I'm not the same person I used to be. But when it comes to conscious and subconscious mind, the way that I use this analogy for people to understand this is, if you've ever seen the Titanic, the movie, you've got the captain of the ship. The captain is your conscious mind. And you've got the engine room. The engine room is your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind cannot do anything that the conscious mind doesn't tell it to do. So you've got the captain of the ship that can see everything. And he's shouting down to the engine room, full steam ahead. The subconscious mind's like, okay, cool, we crack on. The problem is that we're not in control of our conscious mind most of the time, and other people are putting things into our head. We have that internal dialogue of like, oh, this is what I should be doing. And then before we know it, we're telling our engine room to go full steam ahead. And that's why life ends up as an absolute fucking shit show. And then we talk about emotions. So again, if you remember the thoughts and feelings workshop we spoke about dealing with negative thoughts and emotions, and about you are the sky. The real version of you is the sky. And your emotions, your feelings, they come and go just like the weather. And that's absolutely fine. Like, it cannot touch the real you. The real you is always going to be there. The genuine, authentic version of you is always going to be there. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, just like the weather, come and go. So if you haven't seen that workshop, go back and watch that, because again, what Paul's talking about here just takes that to a bit of a level. So let's talk about identity then. I hope, by the way, if there's anything you want to add on that, please let me know. But I think I've kind of summarized it in a way that my audience hopefully will understand from previous episodes we've had. But for me, ultimately, what we're talking about here is identity. And understanding where our identity, that I am, comes from. I am obsessed with this at the minute, about understanding the I ams that we tell ourselves. Talk to me about identity.
Oh, okay, I could talk to you for hours about identity. So this is one of my favorite parts of the work I do. And this has come from lots of different places over the years, working with different people and traveling around to different parts of the world and pulling it all together. I'm just, as I launched the book, one of my clients is an ex-pro footballer, and he very kindly has shared his story, which ties in a lot to what we've been talking about. And he said to me during the show, I said to him, "What, of all the work you did, what did you think was most impactful?" And he said, "This stuff that I'm about to talk about now." So I went to this, the first time I ever heard about this stuff I'm about to talk about. I was in Bali. So when I first changed my life, I went off to Bali, spent 3 months out there. It was fantastic. And I was at a presentation this girl was doing, and she was talking about us having different personalities. So where I start off with this stuff now is, the biggest lie any of us are ever told is that there's only one of us. So I grew up thinking there's just Paul. That's it. There's just me. Same for you. Just Daniel, for the listener. Just me. And when you first start talking to me about this, like, of course, well, like, where's this going? And then the first time I ever heard this was in this workshop, and this girl was saying, but when you stop and think about it, we all have different personalities. Like, there's different aspects to who we are. And she was saying, I always remember her saying, the best thing you can do is start to try to identify them and give them different names, because then you can really get to know yourself better. And one of hers was called Susan, because she said she used to work with someone who complained a lot, and that woman's name was Susan. So her personality that complains a lot is called Susan. And she said, so think of the names for your personalities. And I remember sitting there laughing to myself thinking, my personalities are so prominent, I don't need to name them. They already have names. So most people who would know me in my adult life wouldn't call me Paul. They would call me Kopi, which is my nickname. And when I delved into this, what I realized was, go back to what we were saying before about being a child, and you start out with this pure version of you, which is little Paul. When people talk about the inner child, that's the way I represent it now. Think about the little version of you, however old you are when you think back to you as a child. So I always think of me as about 3 years old, big mop of dark brown hair, big goofy smile, pot belly. That's the little Paul. He's the real version of me before the world started to sort of program him and change him. But he was a really quiet, shy kid, really introverted. And he was born into a very loud family and a very loud city in a very loud world. So when you talk about the captain and the subconscious, the way I like to think about it is, we all think of us as just one thing, but actually the way I like to think of it is, think about in your head, this is just like a big ship. Your body's like a big ship. And in your head is like a control deck, like on the Starship Enterprise or in Star Wars. And you've got a team inside your head and they control everything. And their job is to meet all of your needs and keep you alive. So when they come up against a situation, they say to the real you, little you, can you handle this? And little you says yes or no. Now, from a very young age, what we start saying is no. So little Paul could not deal with situations in which I had to be extroverted. So they were like, don't worry about it. We'll go and build this new guy. So they go back into the lab and they build a new personality. And his name's Kopi. And Kopi is extroverted and outgoing and loud. And he loves drinking and he loves singing karaoke. And in all the situations in which I need that part of my character, he comes out. And what we do over time is we build a whole cast of these people. And we end up, I do this as an exercise and it's in the book. I've identified like 15 different versions of me now. And the key in all of this is, before we do this work, picture it like a cast on a stage. So you've got all these different versions of yourself that you use at different parts of your life. So it might be the extroverted one, it might be the quiet one, might be the dad, might be the person in work, might be the person who goes on dates or in a romantic relationship, the son, the brother, the aunt, the uncle, the auntie. But right now, until you've done the work, there's only one microphone and only one person can be on the microphone at any one time. And before you've figured any of this stuff out, your subconscious decides who's on the mic for you. You don't do it consciously. So whatever your needs are in a particular situation, your subconscious says, give the mic to them. So when this all starts out, I picture it like this. I walk into a bar. My control deck says to little Paul, do you want the mic? And he says, no, thanks. Give it to Kopi. And Kopi takes it. And after that's happened 2 or 3 times, they don't even ask little Paul anymore. Kopi just takes the mic. And as time goes on and on and on, Kopi's on the mic 80% of the time. And when he's not on the mic, there's another fella, Cope. He's the lawyer. He's the manipulator. He's the guy who can persuade anyone of anything. You want to get out of a tricky situation, you bring in Cope. I always talk about Pulp Fiction. Remember that movie? Do you remember Mr. Fox? Yeah. Is it Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, Mr. Wolf. Mr. Wolf. Yeah.
The guy you call in.
Direct line have done that thing on it, haven't they? Yeah.
Yes. Exactly him. That's who Cope is. But I always say, one of my mates was asked the question once on another podcast that I contribute to. You know, if you accidentally killed someone and you needed someone to help you sort it all out, who would you phone? And he said without hesitation, Cope. And I look back now and think, that's interesting though, because he didn't say Kopi and he didn't say Paul, because they're 2 different people. If you phone Paul in that situation, he'll tell you to phone the police. If you phone Kopi in that situation, he'll bring a bottle of Jack Daniels and get pissed and say, let's have a laugh and see what's going on tomorrow. Cope will sort it all out for you. No questions asked. We'll just box it off. Don't worry about it. And the biggest part of the identity piece for me is getting people, and it's really interesting even for the listener now, think of your own straight away. I always say the first ones you can think of are your rock star personalities.
Hey, I'm doing that exact same thing. I'm doing that exact same thing right now. And like I said, Mikey just says he's got goosebumps. I've got goosebumps. I've just been sat there. You just fucking blow my head off with that shit. I genuinely mean that. I've not heard anyone talk about that before. Not once. Of all the stuff that I go into, and again, my audience, people know me personally, I've never heard anyone speak about what you've just spoken about like that. And it makes perfect sense to me because I've got a thing called DJ. So when I was at school, you know how long someone's known me for, because if someone calls me DJ, they've known me since school. And DJ was the kid that got bullied and had to put on this front of being a certain thing and wanted to sleep with everyone. And DJ got him in a lot of trouble. I didn't realize for a while that's basically what this was. And then you spoke right there about being a brother. again, how I act with my brothers is different to how I act around my clients, and being again, how I act with my clients versus how I act with Mikey versus how I act with my coaches, but how I'm acting on the podcast. It's blown my mind a bit, if I'm honest with you, genuinely, because you're completely right. Like when I'm coming onto this podcast, I've built this best version of me that I'm like, right, this is who I want to be. Like, this is what I want to be getting into, this stuff. I'm coming here, I'm trying to add value. So I'm coming on here. I'm not coming on here as DJ, because again, he couldn't handle the situation. It's like, I'm coming on and I'm speaking with people that are smarter than me, so much smarter than me. I then can't come in here with an ego, being like, right, I fucking know everything. Shut up, Paul. You're just here to be a guest member. It's like, no. Shut up, listen, and enjoy what's going on. And that's how I approach this. Right, how can I add value to my audience? I'm always conscious of my audience, always. But then I'm like, right, what can I learn from this guest? And this is why sometimes my brain explodes, because you give so much information. I'm like, fuck, like I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to, what do I do? Again, I'm very cautious of your time here. And I know I want people to get your book, and I'm going to direct them to at the end, because people are going to be like me and be like, what the fuck have I just listened to? What can people do right now as an exercise to help them kind of identify these different characters they've got? Is it literally as simple as sitting down and naming them? Or do you have a specific exercise? Do you have any other tips that can help them? Because genuinely, I think you would have blown a lot of people's minds there, because as you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, this one. Oh yeah, this one. And a lot of people are probably going to be a bit freaked out. Let's be honest, because I understand this stuff. Mikey understands it. I think a lot of people don't know about this stuff, will be a bit freaked out and thinking they may be fucking bipolar and schizophrenic and stuff. So what can we do to just reassure people this is completely normal and get them to sort of identify these different characters?
Well, to start on the reassuring people, I always say the same thing. It's really interesting. We talk about, it's not called this anymore, but it used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's called dissociative identity disorder now, but it makes more sense to people, multiple personality disorder. And when we say that phrase, when I was growing up, I always thought the disorder was the fact you had multiple personalities. And what I've realized now is that's bullshit. We've all got multiple personalities. It's the most normal thing in the world. Think about like literally your reaction. And everybody I've ever discussed this with, including every client around the world, goes 100%. When I tell that first story, the reason I tell that story the way I do is it gives the person I'm talking to time to go, shit, yeah, this person, this person, this person. So the first thing is to say it's absolutely normal. This is one of the things I say to everybody I ever work with, and it gives people a lot of comfort. No matter what you're going through in life, I guarantee it's absolutely normal. It is an absolutely normal human emotional state to be in. Worries, concerns, whatever thoughts you have. I go back to the same thing all the time. I learned from a coach in New York. There's never anything wrong with your thoughts or emotions. What's wrong is what we're taught to think and feel. It's the next level down. So we have a thought or an emotion. It's fine. It's just neutral. The problem is what we've been taught to think and feel about those thoughts and emotions. And you can get yourself into really big loops with this, downward spirals. So the first thing is to be kind to yourself. That's a huge part of the work I do. Be kind to yourself. It's absolutely perfectly normal. Don't worry about it at all. Then the second part is, it's the biggest exercise I do with people that goes through a series of steps, which takes you all the way through to repairing your self-worth and knowing that you're good enough. Because to jump to the end and then come back to the start to answer your question, the problem I see with loads of self-help stuff that does the whole tell yourself you're great, tell yourself you love yourself. Well, that's all well and good, but if that's your conscious mind, if you're standing in the mirror saying to yourself, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself, there's this little voice deep inside in your subconscious going, why do you love yourself? You're a piece of shit. Do you not remember when we did that to such a body last week? And do you remember when you thought this about that person? And you're a bit of a bitch, actually, and you're a bit of a bastard, and I actually don't like. So we can do this as much as we want, trying to brainwash ourselves. Our subconscious is the issue. And it's because we've got these personalities, and some of them we don't like. We've been taught not to like certain parts of ourselves, and they're the key ones. If we want to repair self-worth, it's why I always say to people, like the work I do can actually be quite dark, because the solution to all of this stuff is to face your own darkness, not to keep telling yourself that everything's great.
That's the hard part. People don't like to do that.
100%.
You know, yeah.
100%. And that's why it's so difficult to sell, is that people are like, well, can I just have a pill to make me better?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's like everything in life. Like the most rewarding things you will ever do in life are the toughest things. It's the analogy I always give is, we live in a world where everyone's houses are crumbling from the foundations. And what everybody tells us to do is just keep painting the windows a brighter color. Just keep painting the windows. I'm like, pretty sure my house is falling down though. Shouldn't I go into the basement and fix the foundations? Everyone's like, no, do not go down into the basement. Just keep painting the windows. And the reality is, the only way to sort it out is to go into the basement. It's not as frightening as you think it is once you get down there. And actually, your reaction then, I get all the time. People get, and it's the same for me. It is such a relief because all of a sudden you're like, this makes more sense. And even in relationships, you'll be in a relationship with someone, and one day they're horrible to you, and the next day they're lovely to you. Well, when you can say to yourself, it's two different characters, it's two different personalities.
We all know that. It's when you see, not even necessarily with a partner, with a friend, and they act with you a certain way, then they go with their football mates, and like, oh, but then they'll go to their church friends, and you're like, oh, and then their sex club, and you're like, whoa, what the fuck? But then you realise that it's just all. Honestly, mate.
Exactly. So to make sure I answer the question, the first part of this exercise is literally what you said. It's to sit down with a pen and paper, or do it on a spreadsheet. I mean, it's a big thing when you start getting into it, so you need a spreadsheet in the end. And to make the first part is one column is name all your characters. Sit down and think about all of your different personalities that exist and give them all a name so you can refer. And it doesn't matter what you call them, whatever comes naturally, don't get hung up on it, just so you can identify them. And then in the next column, write down what each of their character traits is. So what personality traits do they each have? Are they extroverted? Are they shy? Are they angry? Are they outgoing? Are they quiet? And then in the third column, write down, when do you think they take the mic? When is it in your life that personality gets involved? And then when I talk to people doing exercise, I obviously do it in two ways. So do it intensively, put half an hour aside and sit down and think about it. And then just forget about it, but let it go around in your subconscious. Because as you're going through your weeks then, just become more, loads of this work is just becoming more aware of who you actually are. So when you're in a situation and you find yourself behaving in a certain way, just ask yourself, is this person on my list? Because often when I'm coaching people, they'll give me their initial list and they'll find 6 or 7, say. And then they'll be talking to me about something that's happened to them. And I'll say, which character is that on your list? And they'll say, they're not on there. I go, I know, we need to add them on. And slowly over time, then you figure out your entire cast. And then the exercise goes on and on, because what you'll often find is you can subdivide them. So you might say, if you're a parent, for example, you might say, there's a dad version of me. But usually there's multiple versions of dad as well. There's fun dad, there's grumpy dad, there's angry dad, frustrated dad. And some of these might overlap, but the whole idea is to split it out so we can just start building a picture of who we really are. Because that's the first stage of all this work, is understanding for the first time ever who the fuck we actually really are, instead of the story we've been telling ourselves about who we are.
Do you have any questions? Do you have a question there?
A slight question. Yeah. I've always felt like this. I've called it chameleoning. I go in different situations and chameleon to that situation. But in those situations, do you ever find yourself conflicted because there's two different groups that coexist? So you think, oh, Mikey Markham, the crazy guy, needs to be here, but also there's the serious people here. Oh dear, can two people actually go to the mic? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And what tends to happen is one of a few things. So you will have more dominant characters that come out, and it will depend on what the situation is. But the other thing is the mic can be passed around quite quickly between people. So you can find yourself switching between characters. The story that popped into my head as you said that then was, I got married in 2012 and had a big wedding in Spain. And it was literally what you've just described. Like, it was all these different groups. And I did my speech, the groom speech, and afterwards one of my mates from Liverpool came up to me and said, "What was that?" And I went, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Why were you speaking like that?" And when I look back at that now, I didn't know any of this stuff back then. But I often think this, like, we often, without realizing it, speak differently. Our voice will change slightly. like our accent will change. With some people, we will have a broader accent, maybe with, with our home friends. I'm more of my Scouse accent comes out more when I'm with my mates in Liverpool. When I travel, when I do podcasts, when I'm abroad, of course it doesn't. I speak slower, I speak more clearly. We even change. This is something I love about the multiple personality thing. It ties in loads to, there's loads, with the ancient archetype type stuff, but I like to keep things quite light. It's superhero stuff. We will often literally change the way we dress. So I used to wear a suit when I was a lawyer. And when I was in that suit, I was Cope. And when that suit comes off, I change into a different character.
I want to get Mikey to, because I said my brain was going, I've never got Mikey to ask a question like that before, but I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something there. That's a fucking great question, Mikey.
Does that answer the question, by the way, Mikey?
Big time.
Yeah.
So hard.
Yeah. And this was exactly, because you can't see Mikey. I can see Mikey. And like I said, how he's responding to this is how I'm responding, which is why I wanted to basically just get his input on this, because, mate, honestly, fucking hell. We're going to have you back on, mate, because we could go all day on this. And I genuinely love you.
Thank you, mate.
Appreciate it. How you come across, how you articulate, and how you're clearly on a fucking mission like I am is brilliant. Like, we're on the same fucking mission to help my mission, the whole thing of this podcast is to help as many people as possible, both mentally and physically, become the best versions of themselves. Like 100%. I said, it costs me money to do this, but this information is invaluable. There's one question I ask all my guests. What advice would you give someone that's listening to this right now that is struggling? What bit of advice would you give them?
The first thing this is something I've learned to do a lot over the past few years, is trust my instinct. So whatever answer comes up first, I do this with clients all the time. I'll ask them a question and their brain wants to kick in, and I go, no. Tell me what came up. And the first thing came up, which is, as it was interesting writing the book, because it forced me to really put things into a structure. I don't coach in a structured way. I go with however the client needs, what if they need to talk about, and we work through things. But when I started putting it into a book and then thinking about all the clients I've worked with around the world, and I started thinking about what are the key points in this, there are two huge parts before you even get into all of the stuff we've been talking about. One is to take responsibility for your life. And when I say take responsibility, I mean take radical responsibility. So everything. We are raised, again, the society we're raised in, wherever we look, we are always pointing the finger at other people. We are always blaming other people for everything. And I always say to people, it's a bit like when you're eating a cream cake when you're trying to lose weight, or you're drinking beer when you're trying to change your life. In that moment, it feels better. Like, it feels like it's helping, it's nice, but it doesn't last very long. It's just like another addiction. When we take responsibility, the problem, jumping around, the problem with that, eating the cream cake, drinking the beer, blaming other people, is you've got no control. If you blame everybody else for everything that's going wrong in your life, you're helpless. And that's why it feels so painful. By saying to yourself, no, I am responsible for everything, every little thing that happens, all of a sudden it's empowering, because now you can do something about it. Whatever is wrong, you can do something about it. And the second, and maybe even more important thing, which I bang on about constantly, and it ties back into what we were saying about the footballers before, is be kind to yourself. Like, one of the biggest problems we have in life with it, which is the low self-esteem programming we've had, is that when I look back, when I first started doing this work, at the way I used to speak to myself in my own head, I was horrible. And I would call it things like drive and ambition and determination, but it wasn't. That's just what life tricks us into thinking it is. It's just self-hate. It's just being mean to yourself, and you don't need it. So actually, being kind to yourself is huge. And there's a counterintuitive trick to this. And I say counterintuitive a lot in the work I do, because so much of this stuff, people are like, really? I'm like, I promise you. The be kind to yourself program that I talk about installing people's minds, we have to start it somewhere. And the problem most of us have, including me when I started this, was When you hear be kind to yourself, when you catch yourself being mean to yourself, your next reaction is to go, oh, you idiot. Like you're not meant to be mean to yourself. Well, all you're doing now is self-hating the self-hate. So the trick is to be kind to yourself at whatever level you catch it. So wherever you catch yourself being mean to yourself, even if you catch yourself being mean to yourself for being mean to yourself, for being mean to yourself, when you catch it there, go, that's okay. I'm just a flawed human being like everybody else. And sometimes I'm mean to myself, and that's okay. Because that's the first step of being kind to yourself. And then slowly you unwind it and you get to the top level. So now, no matter what happens in my life, no matter what mistakes I make, no matter how badly things go wrong, I go, you know what? Sometimes I fuck up. I try my best not to. It's important to say, this is not like a get out of jail free card to run around pissing on everybody else's life and being a twat. This is do your very best to be compassionate and good to other people and to do your best in life. And if you make mistakes and if things go wrong, that's okay. Be kind to yourself. Think about, this is the best way to picture it. Think about that little version of you, that 3-year-old. Think about what you'd say to them if they made a mistake. If they were struggling, you'd put your arm around them, you give them a hug, you say, it's okay. It's going to be okay.
Mate, fucking... Oh, Paul, mate, every part of this podcast, you've just impressed me more and more and more. Oh, fuck's sake, man. Paul, where can people find out more about you?
I appreciate it, by the way, mate. It's nice to hear.
And again, my audience knows this. I don't do this. I don't just put shit like this on. And I'm being completely genuine here. How you articulate this stuff, the analogies that you use, and how you make it so fucking simple that it's like I've literally just had light bulb moment. Because a lot of my audience would have picked up some stuff you said there about being kind to yourself. I talk about this all the time. Like a lot of this stuff that you've spoken about, I talk about it all the time. But what you've done is you've taken my understanding of it to a deeper level. Like, and again, I know it fucking on a deep level. But sometimes I think I've maybe overcomplicated it somehow. And what you've done is you've somehow simplified it and then deepened my understanding of what I know. And I'm genuinely in shock because I didn't expect this today at all. Sorry, where can we find out more about you?
So the book is about to launch in the next couple of weeks.
Is there a pre-waiting list or something people can get onto that?
No, but like my whole thing with this, and the reason I've written the book is there's only so many people you can coach one-on-one, and it takes a lot of energy and therefore is quite expensive. So I wanted to get this out to as many people as I possibly could. So I'm relaunching my YouTube channel and my podcast with the launch of the book. And you can get the first 4 chapters of the book for free, completely free, no strings attached. So you can download the audio version if you prefer that. Listen to those first 4 chapters. If you don't like it, if it's not for you, you can scrap it. No, never have to hear from me again. My whole aim with this is to get it out to as many people as I can for as low a cost as I can. So to get that, go to my website, which is paul7cope.com/free chapters. I'll send you a link to.
Awesome. We'll get Mikey to put it across the bottom of the screen so the audience can see that, and it'll be all in the show notes as well. So all the links will be in the show notes, so you can click on that. Are you big on social media at all? Do you have any social media handles?
Yeah, so I am not at the moment, but it will be Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the same. Paul with the number 7 Cope.
Awesome. Let's make sure that that's all put in there because I definitely would love to have you back on at some point because I feel like I've just scratched the surface with you. Like I said, I've seen your book, and again, it is fucking big. So I knew there'd be a lot of places we could go to today. I didn't know how deep we would go with some stuff here. So like I said, I'd love to get you on at some other point. Again, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you. Again, I know Mikey appreciated that as well. And I know my audience were taking so much value from this. So again, make sure you get on that mailing list. Again, check that out. It's completely free. You get the audio or reading it. And again, make sure you check out all Paul's social medias as well. Paul, this has been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, mate. Thank you for having me on.